Welcome to this week's edition of Courage or Interesting Conversations. Hi, I'm Alan Kearns and welcome back. This week's conversation is with Bruce Firestone. Bruce is the founder of the Ottawa Senators, and at the time you're listening to this, they're in running for the Cup. They're up 3-1 against Buffalo, the number one team in the NHL, and it looks very promising at this point that they're going to be in the Stanley Cup. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Ottawa's story is a very interesting story about how they got the team, and it really started one day when Bruce was driving along the 417 major highway in Ottawa, and he was thinking about what does Toronto have that Ottawa doesn't, and one of the things that popped into his head was a hockey team. And that really was the germ that started this whole virus called hockey fever in Ottawa. So sit back, relax, and learn as we chat with Bruce and he shares his advice on how to start something and leave a legacy behind. Remember, at the end of our conversation, we'll have this week's workout. Welcome, Bruce.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, Alan.
So obviously, hockey is a big thing in Canada, and you have a kind of a very interesting story. I'm going to sort of start before you founded the Ottawa Senators, and maybe give us a bit of a Reader's Digest journey of your career and where you grew up, and a little bit about your education and how you ended up in the hockey business.
Well, it's a long road, and I think most of your listeners will know that life takes many turns, some of them quite surprising. And I graduated from McGill University quite young as a civil engineer. I started at McGill at age 15, and so graduated and applied for a job with Esso in Sarnia. And when they found out I was underage, at that time, age of majority in Canada was 21, and I was not yet ready to sign my own drawings. And they said, "Well, we'll come back in a year or two, kid, and maybe we can give you a job then." And I thought, well, like anybody else at that age, you need a job, you need an income, and they had just changed the age of majority in Australia to 18 under a Labour government led by Gough Whitlam. So I thought, well, that sounds pretty promising. And so about 3 or 4 weeks later, I ended up in Australia working for the New South Wales government in Sydney, and they had great beaches, probably better beaches than Sarnia. I hope nobody.
Probably better beaches than Sarnia.
Nobody's listening from Sarnia, but so I really started my career in Australia and worked for the New South Wales government while I did a master's degree in engineering science at the University of New South Wales part-time. And after that, Max Neutzer at the Australian National University in Canberra asked me if I'd like to come down as a research scholar, do a little teaching and some research, and get a PhD in urban economics, which I did. And I was really on track, I think, to become a university professor, and certainly looked forward to that kind of a career. When my father came to see me, I think it was in 1979, and said that he needed a little bit of help with his business here in Ottawa. And that business was called Terrace Investments Limited. And he said, "I only need help for 6 months, son, but come back and give me a hand." So by 1982, there I was back in Ottawa, working at Terrace Investments Limited and trying to make it a better company. And we had a pretty good run. It was certainly a lot longer than 6 months.
So did you grow up in a business family? What was your family like?
Well, my father was also a university professor at the University of Ottawa, where I'm now entrepreneur in residence, and so it's a bit of a family tradition, I guess. And he was also a civil servant. He worked for C.D. Howe in post-war construction after World War II. He was on the Royal Commission for Medicare, and I think he was very proud of his role as a Royal Commissioner in bringing Medicare to Canada. And then he was also an investor and a business person. He helped start CGOH Television with Stu Griffiths and Ernie Bushnell. And Keeble Cablevision, they started a Cablevision company, and Rental-X Tool and Equipment company. And so he was a pretty active investor, and he certainly was a good real estate investor as well.
So you ended up coming back to Ottawa, and
82.
82, and what kind of things did you get involved with when you came back?
Well, at first, I think our company mostly focused on building office buildings in shopping plazas and doing land development. We didn't build many houses, but we certainly did lots of roads, water mains, and sewers, and sold lots to people like Claridge and Ridgecraft, and I think we sold Coscan, Minto. I mean, you name it, we sold to big and small builders, and we liked that role. And in 1987, I recall that office rents had gone down from something like $16, $17, $18 triple net per square foot per year to $6 because of new entrants into the marketplace and pension funds and insurance companies and banks entering into the business. So we thought we needed a change in direction, and what could we do? And so I remember I had a sob at those days. I would get in my car for some peace and quiet. This is, I guess, the days before cell phones, and I went up and down the Queensway thinking, well, what do we do next? And I asked myself a question: well, what does Toronto have that we don't have? And I thought, well, they have a zoo, you know, and they have a few other things. I wasn't too interested in zoos, but then I thought, well, they have an NHL team, and Ottawa doesn't. And I thought, well, gee, I wonder if Ottawa is big enough to support an NHL team now, and whether we could actually get one. And I thought the NHL was due for expansion, and so I talked to two people at that time: Cyril Leader, who's still with the team as the chief operating officer, and Randy Sexton, who's now the assistant general manager of the Florida Panthers. And I said, look, I think the NHL is going to expand, and I think Ottawa should be a bidder. And they said, wow. You know, Randy was right away very enthusiastic, and Cyril was saying, well, wait a second, how much do you think it would cost? And we all sort of guessed, and I guessed around $35 million, but the NHL in its wisdom decided it was probably going to be more like $50 million, which it was. And then we thought about how you would actually go about doing that. And I said, well, the first thing you would do is, you know, buy a piece of land, and you know, because you need a new building. Civic Center is a cute little building, but you need something bigger and you know, consistent with modern design of arenas. So we bought about a square mile of land in Canada, which would be home to the Ottawa Senators, and we announced that we were going to bid for an NHL team.
Wow! And what was the positive and the negative criticism you had?
Well, I think you know, certainly hockey fans were enthusiastic. You know, I think we sold 15,000 priority registration numbers for a team that didn't yet exist. So people obviously wanted.
So the market was definitely here.
Yeah, they definitely wanted to show their strength and support. Yeah. Over 500 corporations sponsored the bid. So there was a lot of support. I think the media felt that we were in too tough and maybe in too deep, and we were up against some tough competition: Milwaukee, Portland, Seattle, Houston, Tampa, St. Petersburg, and I'm missing a few, Hamilton, and you know, lots of tough competition. And the fact that we didn't have a building, I think the media, a big building, felt that would count against us. But in actual fact, that was an advantage because arenas went through major change at that time.
Yeah, sure. Think about the design.
That's right. Gino Rossetti, from the Palace of Auburn Hills fame, had revolutionized the design by bringing the 3 tiers of suites from, you know, the Vienna Opera House, for example, to the concept of you know, hockey arenas and basketball arenas. So with the change in the financing structure, if you will, brought on by having rows of suites, and I think there's over 140 suites at Scotiabank Place, that really revolutionized the economics. So not having built an arena at that time was actually an advantage because of the change. Okay.
So tell us a little bit how you guys won. I mean, obviously it was heavy competition, and it was more than money involved, right? Everyone had, I'm assuming pretty well everyone came to the table had money.
Well, you know, some had more than others.
Sure.
And
you guys didn't have more than others. We know that.
Yeah, and you know, I think what we did was we stressed that Ottawa had a hockey culture and a love of the game, and certainly a knowledge and understanding of the game, and that we had a great site for a building. You know, I've been asked many times since during that bid process and since as to why the building isn't downtown, you know, on LeBreton Flats or at Lansdowne Park, and the answer to that is relatively straightforward. What we're missing, and still are missing, of course, is a big-time people mover, a subway or a metro. You know, Montreal has the metro, and Toronto has its subway and GO trains, and you know, we were going to have something similar to that here in Ottawa just recently, but it doesn't look like that's going to go forward for quite some time. So we didn't have the ability to move 20,000 people an hour. OC Transport, which does a great job, can move about 2,500 to 3,000 people per hour up and down Bank Street or up and down Scott Street. So really it was Gino Rossetti who said to me, the architect for the Palladium, now Scotiabank Place, that you'd really need a 7,000 vehicle parking lot, and you can't put that downtown. So we ended up in Canada.
How long did it take you from the time you had that in your mind to the actual time you started formally bidding? What was the timeline?
Well, the idea came to me in 1987. We did the land assembly in 1989. We announced the bid in 1990, and were successful in December of 1990. And the team started play in October of 92.
Wow. And what was that like when you were all sort of fighting for the position? Tell us a little bit about why you think you guys won.
Well, I think our campaign was focused largely on the 21 voters that have a vote on these things, and that's the members of the Board of Governors, and John Ziegler, the president of the National Hockey League at the time. And I think that I must have visited all the teams except I think one, 2, sometimes 3 times, had dinner with the members of the board, watched a hockey game with them, told them about Ottawa and what a great city it is, and really focused on the voters, so that we thought going in we had 16 votes and maybe 17 votes that would vote for Ottawa, and that would be enough. And I think the minimum we needed was 16, so we felt pretty good that we had convinced the members of the board before the actual day. And I also remember Norm Seagram telling me not to be like the Toronto Olympic Organizing Committee when they were trying to bring the Olympics to Toronto. And the second last thing that the IOC members saw before they voted, actually voted for Atlanta, the second last thing they saw was a group from Toronto called Bread Not Circuses saying no Olympics in Toronto. And the last thing they saw was, 30 or so young men and women, good-looking young men and women in red and white jumpsuits saying, "Go Atlanta, go." And he said, "Don't let that happen to you. Make sure that the last thing that they see before they go and vote is you and all your people, working hard and saying good things about Ottawa." So they practically had to shut the door to the conference room where they were making this decision on my nose, and we were certainly the last people that they saw, and we made sure that they heard from us the morning of the decision.
Are you passionate about hockey, or was that just you just saw an opportunist? Were you an opportunist?
Well, I got a love of hockey from my mother and my grandfather. My mother's dad. My grandfather on my mother's side was from Russia, and he loved hockey, and even as a little boy he would take me to hockey games, and my mother was very passionate about hockey, and from time to time when we could afford it we would go to the Forum in Montreal, and my grandfather, my mother, and I, we were the ones who really loved the game, and so even as a very little boy there was a great passion for the game, and they certainly instilled that in me.
So once you actually get a franchise, how do you go about finding talent and building a team? Because that's really sort of the next component to this dream.
Well, we had talked to Sam Pollock, who built the Montreal Canadiens dynasty, and Bill Torrey, who built the Islanders dynasty, and Glenn Sather, who built the Oilers dynasty, and all three were remarkably similar in what they said to us. They basically said to us, look, the only way to build a championship caliber team is through the draft. You're going to make a few trades, there's no question about that, but you can't trade away all your young talent. If you do that, you'll build a mediocre team, but you'll never win a championship. So we put a lot of effort into scouting, and if you look at the Ottawa Senators over the last 15 years, they've done pretty well in the draft, picking good players like Daniel Alfredson fairly late in the draft.
And what about your leadership team, coaches?
Well, we had a few hits and misses there, as you're going to have with a new organization. It's not well known. In fact, maybe it's not known at all. But the man we wanted to be our first general manager and coach was Scotty Bowman. And
Wow.
Scotty was out of hockey at that time.
Okay.
People have forgotten that. He was sitting there in Buffalo with really not much to do, and we wanted Scotty to come and work with us, and we had a number of interviews. And I remember Randy Sexton went down to Buffalo to try and persuade Scotty to come and be the general manager and the coach. But he'd had that experience, I think, in St. Louis. And an expansion team, our first year, I think we lost 60 games, or maybe more than 60 games. We lost a lot of games. So
right.
We couldn't get Scotty on board, although he was very, very helpful to us and certainly gave us lots of advice. So it took a while to put the right team in place. And after I left the team and Mr. Bryden took over, and of course Mr. Melnick now, they've done a good job keeping the core people there, both on the business side and on the hockey side, and I think they're very good.
Yeah, there's been a remarkable amount of consistency actually for a professional team, right? As far as some of the core people. Yeah.
Well, it's that way. I think in a lot in business, changing sort of directions a little bit. If you look at successful businesses, they tend to be businesses that could keep an idea in their minds longer than 6 weeks. And you'll find a lot of hockey teams that say, well, we're going to build a big physical team, and then they don't have instant success, and then they say, well, we're going to build a small, speedy, skillful team, and they make a lot of changes in direction. And you do in business have to make changes in direction, sure, but being able to know when to change directions and when not to is really the responsibility of the CEO. And people often say CEOs are overpaid, but if you look at a famous example of a change in direction, when Lou Gerstner was brought in to run IBM, and they said, well, what does Mr. Gerstner know about running a tech company? I mean, he comes from a soup company, and I remember Lou looking at his very first website. He said, well, that's really neat, that's really cool. And he said to the techies who were all showing it to him, well, like, where's the buy button? And they said, what do you mean? It's this. No. How can they actually go out and buy IBM stuff? And then Lou says something like, who are the top 300 IBM customers? Well, that'll take us a while to get that for you. How come we don't know that? And I want to go and visit them. And they said, well, the president and CEO of IBM doesn't go and visit customers. Well, he said, well, this one does. You almost can't overpay a CEO like that who makes good decisions. Now, the CEO that makes bad decisions can ruin a company in no time.
What was that like for you leaving the thing that you founded, the Senators? What was that experience like for you?
Well, certainly, the key thing was working very closely with the staff, many of whom I trained right out of college. Mark Bonneau, Randy Sexton, Cyril Leader, a number of others, Jeff Kyle, Jim Steele. I'm missing a bunch of them. Many of them came to work with me in real estate and the other interests we had, really right out of college, out of MBA school, or out of their commerce programs, CA programs, what have you. And I had an opportunity to train a bunch of terrific young people, and leaving them was very difficult.
How did it impact your identity? I mean, that must have been a tough phase for you, I would think, personally.
Well, it was, and I would be, I would not be accurate if I were to tell you that I didn't kind of wander in the wilderness for a while. I remember getting a call from Robin Farquhar, who was president of Carleton University at that time, saying, "So Bruce, what are you doing these days?" This is after I had left the Sens, and I said, "Well, I'm really not doing very much." He said, "Don't you have a PhD?" And I said, "Well, yeah, actually, I do." He said, "Well, would you like to come and teach a course here at Carleton?" And I said, "Sure, that'd be great." And I went to see Robin, and he introduced me to the director of the School of Architecture, Ben Gianni, and I formed a 14-year relationship with the School of Architecture, where I was able to teach design economics, urban design, real estate development, and that was a wonderful outlet for me.
I saw a quote about Michael J. Fox, and it says, "People sometimes veer into their own legacy after being blindsided by fate." I'm wondering how you being blindsided by fate